Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of a man.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, James Corbett of the Corbett Report joins me. I had James join me to talk ESG and big oil. We to really kind of dig down into what ESG is, how it is going to make a difference in all of our lives, and how it's going to interact with us through digital currencies and digital IDs. Then we get into big oil and their role in pushing the climate change disasterism that we all know today. So I think this will be a really informative episode for y'all. I always enjoy listening to James, and it was a pleasure getting to speak with him. And you know, he has a tendency to know what he's talking about, which is always fun. It's kind of like talking to Scott Horton, if y'all want to know the truth. But RyanBunting.com for all of your graphic design needs. Go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also somewhat okay at graphic design. He designed my podcast logo. So if you want subpar work done for you by a racist, go to RyanBunting.com. He also started his own business, and he's contracting out doing tech work for people. Hopefully, it's not as subpar as his graphic design. So, check out RyanBunting.com and tell him his black friend sent you. I'm not really black. I just want to make that clear. It's a joke. Anyway. Libertarianinstitute.org is having the fund drive right now. So go to libertarianinstitute.org/donate and give us all your money. Because if you don't, we're going to starve. But no, really. We put a lot of work into what we do at the libertarianinstitute.org. And you have actually good podcast hosts that surround me, like Scott Horton's show, Kyle Anzalone with Conflicts of Interest, Patrick McFarland with Liberty Weekly, and Keith Knight with Don't Tread on Anyone. They just kind of let me hang out. I'm kind of like the retard of the family. We also have some really great writers. So go check out the Libertarian Institute to read Sheldon Richman and Jim Bovard and all your favorite libertarians. Check out the libertarianinstitute.org, and don't forget to donate at the libertarianinstitute.org/donate. As always, thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. All right, I am here with one of the best researchers around today, Mr. James Corbett of the Corbett Report. How are you doing, sir?
I'm only hoping I can live up to that introduction, but other than that, I'm pretty good.
Oh, man. You do some great work. Between you and Richard Grove, I can't keep up.
Fair enough. And his bookshelf is quite a bit bigger than mine, so got a lot of research behind him.
Yeah. I wanted to talk to you when I saw the gas prices going up, as we were chatting about beforehand. I wanted to kind of get you on because you had the documentaries, How Big Oil Conquered the World and Why Big Oil Conquered the World, which were great, and I'm going to put those in the links, in the show links, because those are great documentaries. I started rewatching them the other night just because I was like, oh, I gotta touch up on this. And I've been on this ESG kick, and then I see gas prices going up, and everybody's pointing the face like that Spider-Man meme where all the Spider-Mans are pointing the finger at each other. And I was like, no, this doesn't seem right to me. So I just started. First thing I did was like, well, who's on the board of directors of Shell? Who's on the board of directors of BP? What are these people saying? And one of the quotes that sticks out in my head was the CEO of BP was giving a speech, and he said, fortunately, he said something along, I'm paraphrasing obviously because I don't have it right in front of me, but he was saying something about, fortunately the price has gone up so that we can stop being an energy producer and how did he say it? Not an energy distributor. It was something else. It was like a diversity. Like it was some diversity quote. And I was like, what is he talking about? You know? So I wanted to get you on to talk about this because I was like, who would know better than the man who made the documentaries?
Yeah, it's quite a crazy situation we're living through right now, and in some ways perfectly predictable. I think this is part of the crisis that is leading towards the creation of the new economy that I was talking about in Why Big Oil. So people might remember in my How Big Oil Conquered the World documentary, it sort of ends with that question of, well, okay, but here we are in the 21st century, and it looks like all the same, like literal Rockefeller and Rothschilds and all these people who were the kings of the oil industry as it developed and was monopolized are now into this divestment and trying to get rid of all their oil holdings and are now all on board with the green agenda. What's going on? So Why Big Oil Conquered the World tries to pick up this story and explain how this connects and what the bigger game is going on here. And I think it's essentially, if you want it boiled down to a couple sentences, we are being prepared for the neo-feudal society where, of course, energy has always been one of the defining constraints on human development, and no different today. So what better way to constrain the human population than to literally say, okay, we can't use this type of dirty, bad energy anymore. We can only use this wind turbine energy that produces 1/1,000,000th of what we actually need. So we're going to have to tighten our belt a little bit. But how do you restructure the entire global economy that has been structured around the energy systems that we've been using, not without crisis? And so we're going to see crisis after crisis, whether that be COVID scamdemic crisis or whether that be war crisis, and ultimately it will be an economic crisis. And the answer to it has already been provided to us and already laid out in documents and white papers and what have you. We are moving to this post-carbon economy that's going to look like this. And ultimately, I think the real game plan here is in line with what the Technocracy Inc. people were proposing back in the 1930s, which is an economy that is structured around energy credits that are allocated to you as a type of stipend, a universal basic income, as it were, on a monthly basis or whatever they decide. You will get a certain amount of energy credits that you can then spend into the economy, and you will buy things for those energy credits. And once you're out, and too bad for you. That is the ultimate vision, I think, of the people who want to literally control the population in every sense of that word, not just in terms of numbers, but in terms of what that population is able to do. And this is how we get there, essentially.
And programmable CBDC is perfect for that agenda.
That's 1,000%. Every piece of this lines up in such a way that it's almost a marvel to behold if it wasn't so horrifying. But absolutely, digital ID will tie into central bank digital currencies, will tie into your energy allotment credits, UBI, whatever they want to call it, will tie into essentially a social credit score, which will be compiled on you. And we've already seen how this starts, what this will look like not in some, backwards commie China situation, but in Canada, one of the leading democracies of the Western world. It's like, oh, you donated money to the wrong political protest movement. We're turning you off. And that was what that looks like in 2022. By the time we get to the end of this, once we get to the 2030 or whatever it is, it will be so much easier. There won't be a freedom convoy to worry about because the self-driving trucks will simply be turned off at the central control switch. That is the world that we're moving into right now.
Yes. And it's really crazy that one of the stories that caught my attention that I didn't hear a lot of people talking about it, but it was the lady who liked a post on Facebook and the cops showed up at her house. And she liked a Freedom Convoy post and up in Canada, and the Mounties showed up and started questioning her. Like, we want to tell you how you're just giving her information to protest. Yeah.
Right. No, this is what you're allowed to do at protests. We're just giving you information. We're just informing you. So you're monitoring my Facebook post for, things that I'm liking. Yeah. We're just giving you information. We're not interfering.
Right. I started when I was digging into ESG, and I was trying to figure out like what does this mean? Like how can they do this? And I happened to stumble across this after January 6th, and I remembered that story about Bank of America turning over all the records of people that were shopping in DC the day of January 6th, and the feds using that information to go after people. And I was like, hold on. So as you're purchasing things, the bank is taking records of it and then handing those records over to the feds so the feds can make decisions about whether or not you are capable of being an investor or being, and if you're making the right purchases in the right area. What if you're investing in cryptocurrency? What are they going to do to you then? What if you're investing in, Smith and Wesson? What are they going to do to you then? So I started seeing this immediately, that I was like, this is bad news. And people, you mentioned social credit scores, and people, I think, conflate to a degree ESG and social credit scores. I think there's a difference. Can you explain a little bit about that?
All right. So I actually, the best way I've heard this articulated is that you can think of ESG as a kind of a social credit score for corporations, and it will function at that level so that investors will be directed away from investing funds in certain corporations. So what we're looking at is a system for controlling the corporatocracy that can be modeled or could eventually be directly applied to individual citizens. I don't think that's the way it's working yet, and that's not the infrastructure that's being set up yet. So let's go back up a little and set the table. ESG, environmental, social, and corporate governance standards, and this is a metric for measuring how good your corporate social responsibility is. There's been iterations of it and it's been forwarded by different groups over the decades, but the ESG term itself was coined in 2005 by the UN Global Compact. What's the UN Global Compact? Well, let's take it from the bastion of truthiness, Wikipedia. There you go. United Nations Global Compact is a non-binding United Nations pact to encourage businesses and firms worldwide to adopt sustainable and socially responsible policies and to report their implementation. Blah, 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 areas of human rights, labor, environment, anti-corruption, part of the cities, the Global Compact through the cities program, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, in 2005, they had a report called the Who Cares Wins Conference. And that report was, at least as far as I can tell, where this term ESG was coined and first forwarded. It took a while for it to catch on, though. And it's really in the last couple of years that the idea of assigning ESG scores, okay, let's rank. How good is this company doing on our standards for what it needs to do for its environmental responsibility, its social responsibility, its corporate governance, and then coming up with a score in which you can grade and rank different corporations. And if you don't happen to meet a certain threshold, you don't invest in them, because if you, as an institutional investor, go in and invest in a company with a low ESG score, that's going to lower your ESG score, and then you'll get less funding and people will be less willing to work with you. So it's essentially sort of this, I mean, hey, it's a voluntary system. It's non-binding. This isn't a government regulatory system. So and there's nothing ethically wrong with it, right? But obviously it's the way that this is being set up. And, you know me, I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist. So I might look at, literal conspiracies, not closed secret conspiracies, open conspiracies that have taken place that have led us along this road. One example that is in the forefront of everyone's mind right now, the World Economic Forum, which started as the European Management Forum in the early 1970s, specifically around Klaus Schwab and his revolutionary idea for stakeholder capitalism, transforming our understanding of capitalism and how it should function, where corporations should not be beholden to their shareholders. They have a responsibility to their stakeholders, not just the people who literally hold shares in the corporation, but people who are affected by their business, people who live in the area that the business operates, people, whatever way you can say, I have a stake in what this corporation does. And so that broadens the corporate responsibility of these corporations. And that was one of the key driving themes of Schwab and the European Management Forum / World Economic Forum from its inception. But move ahead to 2014. And there's this fascinating piece from NPR, of all places, that again, it's an open conspiracy. There's nothing hidden about it, but you can go and read their piece from 2014, World's Richest People Meet Muse on how to spread the wealth. And it's literally illustrated. This article is illustrated with a photo of Lynn Forrester de Rothschild, Prince Charles, and the Christine Lagarde, then of the IMF, at this conference that they were holding back in 2014 on inclusive capitalism. So they held this conference in London, and there were about 250 people at this event. And these 250 people represented $30 trillion in investable capital, which was estimated that at that time as roughly 1/3 of the total investable wealth in the world. We're meeting in this one room in 2014 to talk about this concept of inclusive capitalism. And so you ask, okay, well, they're giving these speeches about, what our responsibility is as people with this overwhelming wealth and blah, 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 right? So what does that mean, though? Like, what does that actually mean, inclusive capitalism? And even this article goes on to admit the phrase inclusive capitalism is deliberately broad. People talked about it as valuing long-term investment over short-term profits. Some mentioned environmental stewardship. Others focused on treating workers well. Christine Lagarde, who runs the International Monetary Fund, said it is a way to rebuild trust in the financial system. And ultimately, of course, again, it means whatever they want it to mean. It sounds good, though. Inclusive capitalism, you couldn't get more buzzwordy than that. But that's, I think, the framework in which we start to see this headlong rush into the creation of an ESG metric that somehow assigns a number, a score for you on this scale. How much are you in the club of this inclusive capitalism, or whatever we're calling it this week? How much can we trust that you're on board with our agenda? And so all of the power really lies in whoever's writing the metric itself. Do you think every single investor in every single company that's going to be looking at investing assets, especially for these big institutional investors, are going to be looking at that ESG score and thinking about how was that score calculated and what went into that? And but why did you rank them that way? No, they're just going to be looking at a number, and it's going to tell them, okay, green light or no, red light. And very little else. And so the real question then is the creation of universal ESG accounting standards that essentially the whole world will adopt. Again, no binding treaty or anything. It's just, everyone's doing this, so I guess we'll do it now. And this was specifically talked about in the Harvard Business Review just last month. We need universal ESG accounting standards, where they note that there are this incredible universe of acronyms that are working on this question right now. The CDSB, the Climate Disclosure Standards Board, the GRI, the Global Reporting Initiative, the IIRC, the International Integrated Reporting Council, the SASB, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board. And apparently the one that seems to be the front runner right now for the one that could develop some sort of truly global ESG rating is the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board. And I haven't done the deep dive on any, let alone every one of these organizations yet. And that, so budding researchers in the crowd, knock, knock, wake up. Here's a very, very good place to start some of your research. But you can go into, for example, the CFA Institute, which is the board or the group that certifies the CFA chartered accountant CFA rating, are working on global ESG disclosure standards for investment products. Oh, guess who else is working on an ESG standard? The WEF, the World Economic Forum. Yep. Their IBC, International Business Council, has created a Measuring Stakeholder Capitalism WEF IBC Common Metrics document, which furthers their Measuring Stakeholder Capitalism document from September 2020, which is trying to form this sort of overall picture, not just ESG, but incorporating ESG as well as corporations' adherence to the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, and again, coming up with numbers. So you can see something of a war developing between different bodies that want to control the standard so that they can say, if you do this, you get a good mark. If you do this, you get a bad mark. And they get to certify the people who do this type of metric reporting. At any rate, let's go back to George Carlin. It's the big club and you ain't in it. And right. That's what this is about. They are going to set some sort of global standards for corporate behavior. And the creepiest aspect of this that I've seen in recent weeks that really solidified in my mind, oh, this is exactly what this is about, was this long interview in Politico with Fiona Hill talking about Russia and Ukraine and what's happening there. And towards the very end, they were talking about the response to this needs to be bigger than NATO. Bigger than NATO? Well, not militarily bigger than NATO, but in terms of corporations have a responsibility to not be dealing with Russia right now. And so the interviewer was saying, well, how do you do that? I mean, some companies might decide not to. And she brought it back to ESG. This has to be part of ESG. We have to downgrade people who are going to be working with rogue regimes like Russia or something along those lines. Again, this entire global standard is evolving completely out of the realm of any sort of governmental situation. And this is not something that's going to be gavelled down by law, but it's just going to be the standard that the 250 people or so that control 1/3 of the world's investable assets are going to decide, okay, we'll use this. And now we get to literally dictate what way the world goes. A prime example of that, the 2021 shareholder letter from Larry Fink of BlackRock was all about ESG and how this is the way forward and we have to be on board with this and blah, blah, blah. Of course, BlackRock, one of the handful of institutional investors that controls however many billions of dollars, trillions of dollars. I can't remember what it is, 10 trillion or whatever it is in and of itself. Yeah. These are the places at which the rubber meets the road in terms of the formation of this overall system. So I think of it as a corporate social credit system that, again, can be used as a model for what will ultimately be imposed on citizens somewhere down the road.
Yeah, I think the way Klaus Schwab had described it is he said it was to go after the investors, right? And so you would be able to, if they are doing business with the wrong corporation, the bad corporations, the bad investment strategies, then you would cut off their ability to get loans. So his idea was the investors have the carrot that makes the corporations act. And so you hear this kind of trope going around right now, go woke, get woke, go broke. And I'm like, no, that's not the way it's happening. I'm so convinced that was a psyop planted into public discourse that I'm like, nope. As soon as I hear get woke, go broke, I'm like, you got to watch what this company's doing because they're just distracting you now.
Yeah, and because again, that's based on the old thinking of shareholder capitalism, where the shareholders would actually be concerned about the bottom line profit of a corporation. But that's not what this is about. Right. The people who are investing in these multinational corporations are not necessarily concerned about the bottom line. They already controlled 1/3 of the investable assets on the planet Earth. They want to use that power to direct those corporations along a certain path.
Yes, and they're using a term. I think I heard Trudeau use it the first time I ever heard it during the Freedom Convoy. It's reputational risk. McDonald's pulled out of Russia because of a reputational risk. And you're starting to hear this a lot. And it's like, oh, I see where this is going. I see what you people are doing. If the investors lead the corporations have the carrot that lead the public, right? Because because they are the ones who are experts at propaganda.
Yes. And unfortunately, the public has already demonstrated in spades over the course of the past century, let alone the past decades, that, yeah, I'm sure they can complain and they might not like it, but they will go along as the corporations start to change, because doing otherwise would require genuine work. And you would have to, I don't know, shop at your local mom and pop store and buy off-brand stuff. And no, I want to go to Walmart and buy whatever, Nike and whatever else it is. And that is the road towards corporate serfdom, essentially.
Well, and I know Glenn Beck has been focused on the Great Reset a lot here the last year, and he wrote that book. I read it. It was a decent book. It's actually pretty good for people that aren't like versed on it, haven't been researching it, haven't been reading it. It's very good.
I have not read it, but I should.
It's good. It's not a bad book. It's very good for normies to get introduced to these ideas. Excuse me. But he one of the things that he's been doing is he's been saying, well, you got to go local. You got to go local. You got to go local. And what this tells me that Glenn Beck has not read and he's not been indoctrinated into is Parag Khanna. because Parag Khanna wrote. I found out about this article, this essay that Parag Khanna wrote through Patrick Wood's book, The Long
Mm,
Road to the New
right.
World Order.
Right. Yes.
Yes. So Parag Khanna wrote a book called, what did he call it? Devolution Through Decentralization. That's what it's called. And it's on his website. I've read it several times. Anytime I meet somebody or that says they're going to run for office, I send it to them. I'm like, here, you got to read this, because what they're talking about is like, let the people have their social structures locally. Let them, if they want to decentralize, if they want to pull away from kind of the woke social justice kind of idea, let them pull back, because we don't need to control the society if we control the corporations, if we control the companies and the politicians in their local regions, that they can have whatever culture they want. So this is far beyond anything that you and I have had time to think about. These people are billionaires. They can pay people to think about every scenario that you and I could think of to fight back.
Exactly right. No, I think, again, this gives, once again, the lie to the idea that this is a democracy and you are the government and you decide. No, of course not. This is I mean, it's not simply a corporatocracy, but that's at least one way that power is wielded in our society. And so, yes, it doesn't matter which flavor of cola you're buying. Is it Pepsi or Coke or maybe one of the other brands? It doesn't matter. It's literally the same thing in the political context. So I agree with that. I really, yeah, now that you mention it, I do remember that, but it's been a few years since I read Patrick Wood's book, so I'll have to refresh myself with that. And I didn't actually go back to the source with the Parag Khanna book article that you're talking about. But I would say it's not so decentralization in and of itself is not itself the solution, but consciously done for conscious reasons. That's why I think the conscious intention of the people is perhaps the most important part of this. If people don't know why, like why bother to shop at a mom and pop? Why bother to try to bring things down to a local level? Why have a local community? If there's no reason for it, then yes, it will simply be scooped up. And one way that could be done is the Global Cities Network, the Strong Cities Network, whatever it's called. The United Nations and other organizations have been for some time trying to forward Agenda 21/Agenda 2030 through, okay, we're not going to do it through national governments trying to change constitutions and what have you. That's clearly not going to work. Let's do it at the local level. So we'll start these local groups. We'll get the mayors and the council members on board, and we'll start to pass these sort of local resolutions, and we'll start to change the structure that way so that it happens piecemeal, but throughout a coordinated effort. And another way that they try to bring people on board with this is through the Delphi technique, where, come on, guys, we invite your public opinion, your public participation. We'll take all your comments, and then we'll come up with a plan for what we should do in the local area. And so you've already limited it down to people who actually care what's going on in their local area, which is maybe 1 in 100. And then you invite them in, and they can have a say, and they can, here's your public comment space and time, and you can come talk to the council and blah, blah, blah. And then we'll come out with a report based on all of the feedback we've received. And then they come up with a report that they wrote before the whole process took place anyway, and do exactly what they were going to do. So this is how you control things, but it seems local and decentralized, but it's not really. And again, if people don't consciously understand what's happening or why they should do things this way rather than that way, then they can easily be led into the next trap.
Yeah. And one thing I can say that at least has been reported, that Glenn Beck has approached several states with anti-ESG legislation, and several states are working to pass these anti-ESG bills, but the bankers have reacted, and they are lobbying, and they are going after the state legislatures now, and really working hard to infiltrate the state legislatures, which you had to expect. I mean, they're not going to give up on their goals, all willy-nilly. They're just not going to let this.
I haven't looked at the anti-ESG bills in their particular, so I would really like to know how they are written, what these proposed pieces of legislation actually say, because as I say, the ESG itself is not a legislative thing. It's not going to take place on the governmental level. It is simply a voluntary standard that will be adopted by companies, right? So I'm wondering, on a state level, would the state say you can't report ESG or something along those lines? That again seems like a government overreach.
Yeah, it's something along the lines, from what I understand, and I'd have to go look at the bills. I haven't looked at them in detail, but I've just kind of heard what he's reported that they're writing is, and I think New Hampshire wrote one, so that might be a good one to go look at, because they are the free state, so New Hampshire wrote one. I know Idaho had one that the banks really went after the Idaho one, so it triggered them like majorly. But I think what it's saying is that banks cannot require ESG, like investors to be investing in only top tier ESG platforms. I think that's kind of what they're getting at. I think they're trying to kind of do like what DeSantis did in Florida with the masking mandates and with the vax mandates, saying, yeah, you can't require that the employees get vaccinated. You don't know everything. You're not, we have HIPAA laws. And I think that's kind of what they're trying to do with the banking industry, is say, look, there are privacy concerns with this, and you can't be getting involved in people's business in this direct fashion. So I think they're trying to base it off the Fourth Amendment, if I understand correctly.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm not a constitutional scholar, let alone a corporate lawyer or anything of the sort. It just seems to me that invites, again, government overreach and telling corporations what they can and cannot do in terms of their due diligence. I mean, banks have to make some sort of determination about who they can loan to at the very least, right? Can a government come in and say, well, you can't make a determination based on these criteria? Well, okay, but then where do we draw that line, and who gets it? Again, that opens up a whole... Again, engaging with it on the political level and the legislative level seems to me like the wrong way around of this, because as we've already stated, it is the international superclass, whatever they want to call themselves, of the hundreds or the tens of trillions of dollars. 130 trillion, I believe, is supposedly in the war chest of the Glasgow Alliance, Financial Alliance on Net Zero, GFANZ, which started last year, which is essentially going to operate along these lines, except for the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. But I'm sure they will be incorporating ESG metric as part of that whatever they come up with for how they're going to invest that wealth. That is where this really, the rubber meets the road. And so state legislatures that can act against it, hey, okay, go for it. But I just don't think that's fundamentally going to solve this problem.
Yeah, no, you quite possibly could be right. I think where they're where they're really getting the red flag is like, oh wait, the government has found a way around the Constitution by utilizing corporations, and no matter how much money government has dumped into corporations, creating this corporatocracy that we see around us, this public-private partnership that everybody seems to be aware of now that they weren't aware of 10 years ago, even though it still existed. They still call these companies private. And that's the problem. It's like, how much money does the government have to invest in a corporation before that corporation is no longer private?
Yeah, that is the determination that, again, I think it speaks to our lack of ability to understand the system that has been erected around us, which we have been taught to believe is a democratic constitutional republic based on these principles and blah, 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 whatever indoctrination you get in whatever particular patch of the earth you were born into. Right. Whereas in reality, it doesn't function that way. And again, this is the sort of self-evident reality that people on the ground in the flyover states and whatever understand and have understood their whole lives, that yes, you're voting for Pepsi or Coke and take your pick, and they're both going to screw you. It's just in what manner are they going to screw you? Right. So I think this is a recognition of that reality, that ultimately, yeah, government / establishment, corporate, multi-global complex, it is the same thing. But you're exactly right. Part of the amazing trick that they do is just rebranding. So what we used to identify as fascism or corporatism, we now identify as public-private partnership. And it sounds, this is great. This is the new thing we're all on board with. Right. I'm an anti-fascist. I hate the Nazis, but hey, man, I love public-private partnerships and the wonderful things that they're going to bestow on the public. Yeah. So we're thinking of it, I think, I want to say we're thinking of it in 18th century terms. I'm not even sure it really applied in the 18th century. But here we are in the 21st century, and it ain't working that way.
Right.
And people who are stuck in that mindset will be still trying to think of things, for example, in the US context, in terms of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which clearly does not, it's not applicable to the situation that we find ourselves in, insofar as that isn't the system that we're actually living under.
Yeah. All right. Well, I want to spend the last bit of time here talking about the oil industry, because, like I said, there was that, listening to conservatives and Biden and then the oil industry, it was like that Spider-Man meme where it's just three Spider-Mans pointing at each other. Like, it's like, yeah, I think y'all are all responsible, like, for this. So we've seen a lot of stress on the oil industry here recently. And it did not start with Russia, but it was exacerbated with the Russian invasion of Ukraine due to the amount of oil and gas that Europe gets from Russia. And so cutting off those supplies, Russia then, the U.S. sanctions Russia, says, okay, we're going to sanction your oil market. And then the conservative point of view is, well, Biden has canceled all these leases on public land, which is true. He has, due to ESG metrics. Okay, we get that. But there is the idea that the oil companies aren't speaking out, right? The oil companies are staying quiet. Why are they so quiet? Why aren't they saying anything? And if you watch Why Big Oil Conquered the World, you learn that the whole climate disaster religion started with big oil. And I think that's very hard for people to wrap their heads around.
That is the fundamental layer of this particular part of the PSYOP. And I know that people have a difficult time with it. I had a difficult time with it. I actually, thinking back to my journey down the rabbit hole into starting the Corbett Report, I think the last bit of normie land that I was hanging on to was the climate disaster. I'm like, well, yeah, I know 9/11 and I know all this crazy stuff that I wouldn't have believed even a few months ago, but surely not that. No, they can't be lying about that. And unfortunately, having to take a look at it and come to my own conclusion, oh, okay, they are definitely misleading us about that. So who are the they? And again, once you start to look at specifically some of the connections of the organizations that have emerged around what is touted to be the $100 trillion transformation of the economy into the new energy economy, at least that's the way they themselves are framing it. You start to see, surprise, surprise, some of the biggest corporations in the world, including the oil majors, are involved in it. So in Why Big Oil, I specifically cited, for example, the United States Climate Action Partnership, which issued a call for action, which became a blueprint for legislative action, which became the basis for the American Clean Energy and Security Act. And who was on the board of this Climate Action Partnership? It was BP, ConocoPhillips, General Motors, all of these corporations. Why would they be for that? Why would the CEO of BP be out there being interviewed by, I think it was Bloomberg, as the Paris Climate Accord was coming into shape, taking place? Yes, we're part of the Oil and Gas Climate Initiative, which is 10 of the big companies in the world who are working towards projects and technologies that are needed. It is because the writing has been on the wall for decades now that, yes, we are moving into this new economy, this new energy economy. So you better be on the right side of that, or else you're going to go to zero. Net zero might be an apt description of your bottom line at the end of this if you don't do the right things. We see that also geopolitically with Saudi Arabia and I want to say KSM. That's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. The current crown prince of Saudi Arabia, whose name is escaping my memory off the top of my head.
Oh, I can't think of it either.
Yeah. Anyway, he came out with NEOM, his project for this $500 million city of the future out in the desert. That's going to be the technocrats' wet dream of absolutely everything tracked and controlled and surveilled and digital at all times. It's probably pie in the sky. It will probably never come to fruition. But at any rate, the hundreds of millions and ultimately billions are flooding into this project and are being funded into existence on the back largely of Saudi Arabia's oil money. Again, time and time again, this money is being shifted away from that sector of the economy, and that's for a reason. That's because here's the bottom line of this: how do you shift over an economy that does, at the very least, it does function? We do have an industrial society in which things can be produced and all of this can happen, towards a society where that's going to be impossible. In their own words, in their own documents. Read the UK Fires document from last year about not net zero, absolute zero. And they're saying, no, net zero is just a con game. It's a shell game. They're going to say, oh, don't worry, we offset that with this, but that's a shell game. No, our goal has to be absolute zero, not net zero, which means literally no emissions, no carbon emissions of any sort from any industry. So that's going to mean the end of airlines and airplane, the entire air travel industry as we know it. That's going to mean the end of international freight shipping, cargo shipping, until we can get nuclear powered cargo ships. That's going to mean the end of the construction industry until we can find ways of concrete or steel or these sorts of things that we can produce somehow without emissions. They're literally saying the end of all these industries. And that they're not saying that as a, hey guys, this is absolute lunacy. They're saying, no, this is what we should be striving towards. So this is the vision of the future. It really is neo-feudalism, and it is being sold and packaged to the public as a good thing. That is the most insidious part of this.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking, this guy Bernard Looney from the chief executive officer of BP. It's just. I think he's one of the creepiest of all of them. I got some screenshots here. So he announced BP's new purpose to reimagine energy for people and our planet, and its new ambition to become a net zero company by 2050 or sooner and help the world get to net zero. Soon after, he shared BP's new strategy to transform from an international oil company to here's that word I was trying to think of earlier, an integrated energy company, from one that produces resources to one that delivers solutions to customers. That's what I'd see that. And I'm like, what? And then the CEO in a speech, if you go, you can read his speeches from like last year on their website. And one of the things he said was, thankfully the price has gone up so that we can successfully transform to an energy integrated company. And it's like, wait, you're British Petroleum. You're not British Wind. Like, what the hell? You know?
Actually, Anglo-Iranian oil, if you go back far enough, as
true.
I do, and how big oil conquered the world. But yeah, that's exactly right. And this is exactly how they're going to sell it. It's about repackaging. It's about putting a new narrative on it. And yes, we're not about drilling things out of the ground and using that to fuel productive industry anymore. Now we're about energy solutions. And what does that actually look like? I went over this a few weeks ago in New World Next Week. The UK steel industry is starting to go fallow for weeks at a time, just no production at their steel plants, not because they physically can't do it, not because there isn't the ability or the demand for it. No, because the new constraints that the UK government is placing on the industry is making they can't exceed a certain quota of production. So they have to reduce the amount of steel they're actually producing. And that quota is going to be lowered in stages over the course of decades until there's no steel left, right? This is how it's done, just a little bit at a time. And you have to believe, I mean, I get that this is the repackaging that will be used to sell the normies on this transition to neo-feudalism. And I'm sure there are a lot of true believers who really believe they're doing it for Mother Earth and all this. But you have to believe that certainly someone like a Looney or people in the higher echelons of these companies know that this is malarkey. They're selling the public. I guess they really believe they are in the club. And don't worry, they're going to be protected as we transition into this new feudal society. And maybe they will. Maybe they won't be double-crossed. I don't know. That's the internal politics at the top of the pyramid that we can but dimly see at our level. But at any rate, they are selling us into neo-slavery.
Yeah. Well, and after that paragraph, it gets into his work with diversity and inclusion and equity. And it's like, what does this have to do with him being the chief executive officer for an oil company? But you know, as much research as these conservatives are doing on like the Great Reset, like a Glenn Beck, they're not talking about the board of directors of these oil companies. And I'm like, wait, like you can't have this section of the corporate structure you're not allowed to speak about.
Yeah.
They are
No, exactly.
They're not just as involved. They are they are the ones who are pushing and promoting this and have the power to actually stop it.
Yeah, what you're gesturing towards is the kind of controlled opposition framework of, oh, here's the conservative viewpoint whereby we just need to, you know, flip on the oil and get the oil companies, you know, going again, and that's what we need, and we'll build up America big and strong like before. And yeah, they're not gesturing to the fact that no, actually the leadership of these companies are fully on board with this agenda and are making it happen. They are absolutely on board with it. So we have to address that level of it at the very least, right?
Right.
Yeah, there's a much deeper story going on here.
Right. And it's every company, ConocoPhillips, Shell, BP, like ExxonMobil. It doesn't matter. Just go look at their board of directors and read through their biographies, and you're like, these aren't oil people. They're not. They don't care about the oil industry. They don't care about you getting energy. They don't care about you taking care of yourself or the resources that are needed to sustain life that has been completely based off of oil, and everything has, I mean, you point this out in your documentaries, how everything has petroleum product involved in it nowadays, whether it's plastic or, you know, pharmaceuticals. It's all in, you know, controlled by the petroleum industry, and they're going to cut all of that out.
So when you look at the really big picture and get the 20,000 foot overview of not just the past few years, but the past couple of 100 years, it makes perfect sense. There is nothing about this that is difficult to understand. Okay, this is the energy source that will clearly guide us into this industrial revolution and beyond. So let's monopolize control of that energy source. And now you have essentially control of human society, more or less. It's not direct control and you can't tell people what to do. But if you more or less control the energy supply of the earth, that's enormous capital that can be wielded in for specific agendas. So of course, that's exactly, for example, what the Rockefeller family did. Took that incredible wealth and then transformed it into political capital and societal control capital in various different ways. And now what do you do? Well, okay, we've got all this control over these various different things. Let's put them all together. And then since we have the monopoly control or near monopoly control over this resource, we can just take that resource out of the equation and collapse it down to this beautiful, completely controlled little ball. And that, from that perspective, it makes sense. If you want to literally control the world. I mean, I know that it sounds ridiculous. It sounds like a cartoon, but if you literally wanted to do that and you were starting in, say, the mid-19th century, that is exactly what you would do. And hey, look, that's exactly what's happened. Yeah. So I guess, again, it always comes back down to, okay, that's the big overview of a couple of 100 years of history that I didn't personally partake in any way, shape, or form, other than being born into a system that existed before I got here. Right. What do I do about that? Yeah. And, you know, that's really the question. And if you're looking for a simple answer to that, I'm afraid I'm going to have to direct you to someone who will provide you a simple answer, and probably not a correct one. But I cannot think of a way from within this system to change the system in a way that's going to, no, okay, we're going to convince those 250 people with 1/3 of the world's investable wealth to not go down this path. And they're not going to create these structures and these international bodies that interact with banks and institutional investors that, again, I have absolutely no control over. No, we're going to convince them to do that. I don't see how. The only thing that we have is our power, our labor, our time, our attention, our energy. That is the only thing that I have direct control over. And I can direct my power and energy and attention and resources into investing in the future that I want to bring about. And there's a million different things that we can think about and talk about with regards to that. But that's the only thing that I have any sort of control over when it comes to my life. I don't have control, unfortunately, over the investable wealth of the planet, which is increasingly being more and more tightly controlled. So all I know is the structure that has been created is a behemoth that is difficult to even comprehend in how overwhelmingly vast it is. The only the only thing we can do is turn away from that behemoth and do what we can for each other, because that behemoth isn't going to take care of us. And no one wants to hear that, because that isn't the happy life of, hey, we can just go on and keep with all our, electronic slave devices and everything and just keep going as it is and just tweak a thing here or there. I don't think that's going to be the fundamental answer to this.
Right. Yeah. And it gets even more complicated when you realize that the same families that are controlling the energy resources of the entire world are also controlling the central banking.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So the Rothschilds went from banking into oil, and Rockefellers went from oil into banking.
Right. And it's just,
it always leads back to the same
right.
choke points for humanity, essentially.
Right. And so as they're shifting our dependence from fiat currency to central bank digital currencies, or from oil and petroleum into wind and solar, it's at their will. It doesn't depend on whether or not you think these oil.
You don't get a vote.
Exactly. You don't have a say on whether or not they're going to be drilling for oil tomorrow. That's not up to you.
No, that's exactly right. Literally, the only control that we have is over what we're doing with our own resources, while we even have any sort of alternative to do with it. So we have to think of it in these terms. Every single time you're filling up that tank of gas at the gas station, you are supporting the companies that are doing this. Every time that you're buying one of these electronic slave devices, you are supporting the companies that are doing this. Every time you eat their fast food GMO crap, you are supporting the companies that are doing this. And every time you are trading in the monetary instruments that they give you to that represent your wealth and your labor and everything that you've worked for your whole life, and you are allowed to trade in this currency to get these tracking devices and whatever else, you have to understand that's all part of this system. So what can we do? We can start, to the extent that we can, stepping out of that bubble. And clearly I'm not floating on a cloud here. I'm talking to you through these electronic devices. I've got the latest, greatest slave tracking technology. We are all part of this system. We're born into it. We're steeped into it. But until and unless we start finding and building up communities that support and understand what they are supporting, which again has to be the baseline for this, because if you don't understand it, you can easily be misdirected. Right. It's a lot of work. I wish I had a happier thing to say, but I can't sell you the $29.95, solve all your problems workbook or something. Unfortunately, it's the creation of a parallel society, and that doesn't happen overnight, and it's not going to happen easily. And it's probably not going to happen ultimately without bloodshed. Yeah. I mean, there's no way that this happens peacefully and happily ever after. Yeah,
no, I understand, but we're getting close to your cutoff. I know you had a hard out. I want you to plug everything that you're doing right now, and like I said, I'll put all this in the show notes so people can find it.
All right. Well, people should go to CorbettReport.com, CORBETT report.com. That's where all my work is located. And for the purposes of today's conversation, you can type ESG into my search bar to see some of the things that I've talked about with regard to that in the past. And you'll probably want to go to CorbettReport.com/Big Oil if you haven't watched my How and Why Big Oil Conquered the World documentaries. Again, everything available for free viewing, free reading. Make use of it as a resource. Post it everywhere, anywhere you want. That's what it's for. I hope it's of value to people out there.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time, man, and I want to do this again. I always appreciate your work. I try to keep up as much as I can. It's not easy, but I do. So.
We could probably have 100 follow-up conversations just to this conversation alone. So
we could.
Look forward to talking to you again.
All right, Bubba. You have a good
one. All right. Take care.
Yes, sir.
If you're gonna play, scam, pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn-out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants out of taking our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the times that I've taken our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the things that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names, on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. Just 4 more years of war and taxes, 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the times that I've taken our freedoms. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the times that I've taken our freedoms. Don't feed them cause we don't even need them. We'll never celebrate the times that I've taken our freedom. Fuck them, don't feed them cause we don't even need them. I'll never celebrate the times that I've taken